bosses. He runs firstcomicsnews.com. He does all kinds of other cool, wonderful stuff. I am honestly jealous of your like comic rack behind you right there.
Oh, that's everything I published.
That's
G-Man Comics. This is my G-Man comic
amazing.
office. Behind that is a fraction of my collection in comic boxes.
Nice.
I bought some drawer boxes, so they kind of work like file cabinets, and that's my more modern stuff. And then I've got files downstairs in the garage with more stuff.
So what's like your earliest book?
Well, I used to have a Golden Age Captain America number 9, but when I was a retailer, I had to sell it because that's what you have to do when you're the retailer.
Well, yeah, see, retailers, a lot of people don't realize retailers are big fans of their books, but they got bills to pay. So since they got bills to pay,
well, I had 10,000 comics at one point, and I thought I had a big collection, and then I opened the store and realized I had to sell everything I owned, or, because I was doing that instead of anything else. And so it went from a hobby to a profession. And 10,000 books doesn't really fill a store. I didn't realize that at the time, but it barely, made a dent in the store.
No, it makes like one section of the back issue bins, and that's pretty much it.
Well, I mean, at home it took up so much space.
Yeah, I know, but it doesn't do that.
But then when you own a storefront, the storefront is huge, and it takes, and so, and then you have to sell everything you love, because if you're not selling the comics, you're not in business.
Well, yeah, but there are some you love more than others. And I know this from retailers, because retailers, I find, love, I'm not going to say they love the exact same stuff, but everybody knows what the good shit is. Like everybody.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So, for example, I'm a big sucker for Jack Kirby's DC stuff in the 70s. So,
love the New Gods.
Yeah, love New Gods. Camity's my personal favorite. But no matter, like, everybody agrees that's a good run. So good, in fact, that the retailers will make sure that those ones in particular, I've noticed, are pretty close to full price. Some books, you go, they come and they go. If I can get rid of them, I can get rid of them. But some of them, like the really nice ones, like, I really like having this in my store. So if you pay for it, I'll let you have it. And then there's
when I started, I had signed a lease, and I had to pay the rent at the end of the month.
Oh yeah.
And, I had a full run of Flash from 105 forward. I had a full run of Justice League. I had a full run of Green Lantern from 75 forward, and all the Neil Adams stuff.
I have all the early Green Lantern stuff. Like, I have some issues for Superior.
I had a full run of Avengers, including a Jack Kirby signed number 4. I had a full run of Daredevil. I had a full run of X-Men from the relaunch, none of the reprint stuff, but all the stuff that was done by Len Wein and Chris Claremont and all of that. Nice. I had Captain America, a full run of that from the Silver Age, starting with Tales of Suspense. I had a full run of Iron Man. So, I mean, I had been collecting comics since I was a kid. My father bought me comics because his mother threw them away when he got bad report cards. And so he would take me to Sunday school on Sunday, and we'd stop at 7-Eleven, and he'd pick up, I'd get a comic and a Slurpee. And when I was even littler than that, he was reading me comics as bedtime stories.
Nice.
Because that gave him the reason to buy the comics that he wanted to read, but as an adult, he felt uncomfortable with it, but it was reading him to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he worked in Hollywood at one point, and there was a store there, Collector's Bookcase in Hollywood, that sold Alan Light's flashback reprint series, which were all black and white printed copies of the Golden Age comics, or the key Golden Age comics.
So you've been in this.
And so he would go and buy those and bring them home, and my brother and I would read those. And they were the comics from his childhood that he had remembered, but it gave me a huge appreciation for the Golden Age characters reading all those. I had a full run of of Invaders and All-Star Squadron and all that, because I love the Golden Age characters.
The Golden Age is the one area of comics I don't have a ton of knowledge on because it's a little before my time, just a little bit before my time.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, well, yeah, but you
I had they put out a book in when I was a kid about all the best Superman stories, all the best Batman stories, all the best Wonder Woman stories. It was from the 30s to this. It was Superman from the 30s to the 70s, Batman from the 30s to the 70s, and then they had Captain Marvel from the 40s to the 70s. And so that gave me appreciation for those stories, and I was able to read those as well that I never would have read before.
Yeah, but like I said, so I came to comics in like the 90s. So Silver Age stuff was easy for me to still kind of see from time to time. But Golden Age stuff was becoming incredibly scarce. Now as we move like closer and closer to the 100-year mark, like 100-year mark in some of these cases, right? They're all but like impossible to come by. I've seen some all-American comics with the old Alan Scott Green Lantern. Like those are super hard to come by, and they definitely come with the price tag that comes with it. But it's a rare thing now. I mean, they still exist, but you don't see them every day anymore either.
Well, when I was into starting off in fandom, one of the oddball things I liked were the Mighty Crusaders.
Nice.
The Red Circle Archie heroes.
Yeah.
And I picked up some of the back issues that, from the Silver Age that predated me, but, and it was a different flavor there. There was a lot of humor in that. And people think, oh, that was because of the Batman show, but the Archie started their reprints in 59, or not reprints, their Silver Age in 59, and they were done by 67. And the Batman show didn't start till 66. So they were just both tapping into camp comedy, and people who weren't alive when that happened or aren't aware of the dates think that, the Batman show predated the Archie stuff, but no, they were contemporary, or Archie actually a little ahead. But then when they did it in the 80s, which is where I picked it up, they did it real straightforward, and I really enjoyed The Fly and The Shield and the Mighty Crusaders and all of those, and I picked all those up. And Sean Clay did a whole project where he collected all of the Golden Age MLJ comics, 217 of them, and he scanned them all.
Wow.
And on my website, mightycrusaders.net, from Sean Clay are 217 scans of Golden Age comics. So if you want to see any of the Golden Age MLJ heroes, you can see them.
There we go. Put that there, right there for everybody that can see it. I spelled that right, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
mightycrusaders.net. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. No.
And then I have a lot of stuff that was unpublished because I got things from other people that didn't quite out. So there's a section of unpublished comics that are kind of interesting too.
Well, it's a different time. Okay, so you talk about the Silver Age was all into campy and fun, especially like in the 60s. The modern age was almost like a deconstruction of all that stuff. That's what like I remember I got into when DC did their relaunch at late 80s, early 90s when they redid the comic, The Fly, Shield,
right.
Yeah. All the Impact comic stuff was a reprint of all that stuff. So it was again, it's just different kinds of storytelling have permeated comics throughout the ages, which like what's important in that age and in that time. Golden Age, it feels like it was a lot more about ideas and hope. Silver Age was having fun with it, right?
I think with the Golden Age, you had the war going on. Yeah. And initially, as they started, it's the war in Europe. But it's still a lot of immigrants coming to the U.S., and it was really, really cheap entertainment. I mean, the comics were a dime, and there was even an off-brand Nickel Comics, which was a less expensive comic. You'd go to the movies, and they'd give you a comic with the movie. I mean, that first submit was a movie giveaway.
Yeah.
And, so there wasn't a variety of different entertainment. And so comics were a low cost entertainment. And when I was a kid, comics were, 20 cents, 25 cents, 50 cents. When I was a retailer, they were 75 cents. They were still, on the crappiest paper possible and low cost entertainment. And the circulation was huge. I mean, hundreds of thousands of issues of every single issue.
Absolutely. And then Diamond became kind of the sole distributor, and ever since, comics have not had the same wide, like, I was at the tail end of the 7-Eleven spinner rack era, where when you go to
Yeah.
get comics at the store. I was at the tail end of that. And then during the mid 90s, it all just magically disappeared. And
When I was collecting comics as a kid, I went to Thrifty Drug and got them off the spinner rack. And then I'd get them at 7-Eleven on Sundays. And sometimes they wouldn't pull all the old comics. And so you'd find an old issue here that had just been there because they just didn't return it. But when they opened the comic store, it opened the floodgates for independent comics. And I love independent comics.
oh, me too.
And
I mean, well,
totally different flavor, totally different styles of comics. And so that was really cool. And you could get a pull list and you got all your comics, because when I'd miss an issue of a comic, I subscribed to some comics when I was a kid. And if they didn't ship one and I'd send them a letter saying they didn't ship one, I was shocked they didn't send me the comic I was missing. They just added one to the back of the subscription. And then I had to go hunt it down.
Yeah, no, I remember those days very, very quick. Like, yeah, it was different. That's why I love. I actually went to the comic shop today, so I was going there just to see what was going on. I'm collecting. Well, you have a bit of an idea what I collect if you see name in my columns, or you
Right.
see what I'm reading. Well, I was checking there. So while I was there, so this is me being in my inner 12-year-old. I see Darkwing Duck #1. I'm like, wait, what? Okay, I'm in. I'm just in. I don't care.
Yeah.
Then I look to the right. I shouldn't have, because then I see Gargoyles #2. I'm like, wait a minute. They got a Gargoyles #2, right? And then I go to my comic book retailer that's there. It's like, you got #1? Yeah, we got it right here. I'm like, just put me on the pull list for both. Just do it. I'm not. I am unadult, like unabashedly guilt. Like, I still love the hobby. It's still very cool. Like, I definitely slide more into the Kickstarter realm of things now these days, just because of
I
the
appreciate
nature.
that.
Yeah, I do. I do. I think you have to be blind not to see what's going on in comics. I think so there, a little foreshadowing, Rick. Guess what I'm gonna be reviewing in the not too distant future.
Very
Might not be
good.
the next one I do. Kickstarter books. Like, these
Yes.
books are on par with anything you can find in a comic shop. And Rob Maltori, if you do happen to listen to this, hi. Right? But
Well, 4 years ago, we started kickstarting comics, and I've been publishing now for 4 years. We start our next Kickstarter on February 1st.
oh, this will be perfect then. This will be
Yeah,
perfect for
I got 11 comics in the next Kickstarter.
Jeez Louise. That's a lot of comics.
Yeah. Well, we intentionally were publishing 5, and somehow it grew.
Yes. Well, I can see that going, like, okay, so I'm still in Canada for another, we'll just say 6 months, probably less, but we'll say 6 months. My big problem with Kickstarter right now is the shipping, right? So paying for, because it's not the paying for the comic that breaks me. It's paying for the shipping.
Well, that's why we do the publishing the way we do.
Yeah.
We publish twice a year on Kickstarter, and the plan is to publish 5 comics. And so we were going to do 5. And the idea is that you can gang ship 5 comics still for about $6 to $8.
Yep.
And then you can ship them to Canada. It's a little more expensive, but you're somewhere between $8 and $12 to Canada, depending on how many pages you put in the comic and all that. Because weight. But if we did the Kickstarters more frequently with fewer comics, the shipping would kill people.
Yeah, no, it does. Like, so I'm seeing that as more of a trend. I think that as the year progresses, there's going to be less campaigns, but more condensed campaigns, because everybody's realizing shipping is being what it is, and you have to, how do I put this? Figure out where to get more bang for your buck. Like, I got no problem paying like $30-$40 for a bunch of comics. I don't. My problem is I don't want to do that and pay $30-$40 for shipping.
Yeah, no, I'm on the same page with you. That's why we do that. We started with Simon N. Kirby, The Agent, which was the first comic. And so the first time out, we did the first 2 issues together. so that, you know, they would combine the shipping, and then the shipping would be technically half as much.
Yes.
And then we ended up doing a book called G-Man Comics 3-in-1. I've got two partners in G-Man Comics, Jim and Eric. And so we each wrote one story in there. And so it was the three of us doing three stories in one comic. And we did an anthology book. And so we did two of those. And then after that, we decided to spin the characters off into their own comics. So we ended up with 5 comics.
There you go.
And then, so now as we're going into the next Kickstarter, we still have those same 5 comics. But our art director, Gilbert, is going to do one of his own comics. And so that takes us to 6. And then we had done backup stories in the last Kickstarter, but it really added to the price of the book and to the weight. And we ended up deciding to do another issue of 3-in-1 instead of doing, instead of doing a 50% bigger comic. You know, then people could decide if they like the anthology or if they like just the main comic, and it would reduce the shipping on it if people got fewer books. So we thought that would help. And so then we had 3-in-1, which adds another comic to it. Jim does some historical reprints. Last time out, we did Black Phantom, which is chronologically the first Black superhero, predating Black Panther. And so now we're doing a Total Eclipse, which is all 5 issues of Eclipse put together in a comic. And Jim's working with the family and with John Jennings to reprint these books that haven't really been reprinted well before. So that's an extra that you can add on if you want. We've been doing this for 4 years. We've ended up with some really, really nice covers. We decided to put together a cover book. So it's the covers without all the trade dress, if you want that, because people were buying mini posters and things like that. And we all in one comic for less money. And on top of all that, we do a handbook each Kickstarter with all the new characters that show up in our comics. Plus, we have a deal where if you back Simon and Kirby the Agent at a certain price point, we will include your character in the comic. So in addition to being in the comic, we put them in their character in the Who's Who book. We put it in the back of Agent Kirby as a Who's Who, and also in the Who's Who book itself. I feel like we give people some value added there. It took me 30 years from the time I tried to publish my first comic when I was a retailer to the time I actually published my first comic and did my Kickstarter 4 years ago. So we like to be able to give other people the chance to not have to wait that long.
No, it's fair. It took me 5 my first time. So yeah. A lot of it's hard. It's really hard to put the comics together. But like I said, Kickstarter is right now, secretly or not so secretly, probably the largest publisher of comics in the world right now. Probably.
Well, it's hard to say because the Kickstarter runs are so much smaller.
Yes.
You know what I mean? You don't see people selling 10,000 units on Kickstarter.
Not often. There are some exceptions to that.
You're seeing multiples, hundreds. You see 100, 200, 300, 400. You know what I mean? But you're not seeing in. I think they just did the Faust reprint, and they were doing 777, and they were going to cap it at that. So they already knew they weren't even going to hit it that because they capped the whole price to make it a limited run at 777.
That could be marketing though too, a little bit, but no, it's not the same environment in the sense that you're going to get these towering numbers. But if you go across the board, but again, so if you look at it this way, you're absolutely correct. But if you look at it this way,
well, right? The breadth of product, the total expanse of the number of titles, yeah, Kickstarter publishes more than probably everyone else combined in the previous catalog. However, you know, the numbers you see on Batman in a month is probably larger than the number you see in Kickstarter in a month, or the number you see on X-Men in a month. You know what I mean? When they're moving 100,000 units.
But this is where it gets interesting, right? Because, okay, the big titles aside, let's talk Batman, X-Men, like all the big titles aside.
Right.
When you get to like some of the smaller presses and turning what the order cutoffs are on Diamond, right?
Yeah.
Some of those are right along par
Oh yeah, if you're a small
yeah,
press
yes.
if you're an indie publisher, you may be doing similar numbers. And in fact, as an indie publisher, you might be doing better on Kickstarter because of the different pledge levels. You know,
Yeah.
you have a lot of exclusives in the Kickstarter that don't exist in previews. And so some of those come at a premium, and those premiums, well, like Brian Polito, who does Coffin Comics. Okay.
Yes.
I had him do a store signing for me when it was Chaos Comics many years ago when I was a retailer. And, you know, the exclusive he sells on his Kickstarter and how well his Kickstarter does is huge.
That's right.
And I don't know what his previews orders are, but I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, he's doing $100,000 on a Kickstarter. I don't know if he's doing $100,000 in previews.
But if he is doing 100,000 in previews, he's got middlemen to deal with there, right? So whereas on a Kickstarter, it's a lot less middlemen. It's just him and whoever he's paying to help do his stuff, right? That's it.
Right. Well, because there's no cut to Kickstarter. Kickstarter takes a percentage. But there is no cut to Diamond, and there is no cut to the retailer.
Exactly.
And so even if you sell 100,000 on Kickstarter, you still have to pay for the printing, you still have to pay the artist and all that, but you do keep more of the dollars for the book itself than you do if you were to sell it to Diamond, because I think they give 60 off on the cover on Diamond to the distributor.
Yeah, so it's been
a long time since I was a retailer, so I don't know the numbers accurately. It's just
but I mean, even though I think Diamond has a little more competition today than it did pre-2020, it's still the big game in town, right? So you're doing business with them.
Well, I worry about this too, because Diamond supports the retailers, and I don't know that you know, as things keep moving to Penguin Random House, so you know, publisher after publisher after publisher, if Penguin Random House has any interest in supporting the smaller publishers that survive only, you know, through Diamond, you know, once Penguin gets enough of the big publishers, you know, if you happen to be you know, Action Labs or Red 5 or AC Comics, while you have a fan base, the retailer may not want to pay shipping on that if it's not gang shipped with other things they buy. Just as you're having issues with the shipping to Canada on just the Kickstarter books, this could be an economic problem for you know, retailers as more and more of the big guys go to Penguin. Because I don't, you know, I mean, unless you're a big indie store, it becomes harder.
It gets tricky. So I mean, when we go back to the 90s, there were I think a dozen retailer like distributors back then. So on one hand, you could look at it and go, I think it's a good idea that it diverse. I think Diamond as a monopoly wasn't good for anybody. But I do see what or essentially a monopoly for all intents and purposes.
Right.
So the idea of seeing a diversified distribution chain, I think in the long term is great. But there's that intermediate, like what you're talking about here, of everything adjusting to whatever it's going to adjust to. I mean, if you look at, I don't know if Aftermath is still in existence right now. I mean, you look at like some of the like publishers like Valiant and Red 5, like some of the other ones you're talking about. Yeah, they might not survive this change as they know it, or they're going to have to go on Kickstarter themselves, much like Boom's doing with some of their books, and to balance the cost of making them.
Yeah, because the thing is that, well, like you mentioned Valiant. Valiant publishes one title a month.
Right now, yeah.
They rotate which titles they publish, but they publish one title a month. And publishing one title a month, I don't know that really works as a model that Penguin Random House would be interested in distributing. No, you know, even doing the paperwork for that. And so I think that as you know, big entities look to gobble up the distribution, it becomes harder and harder for the smaller publisher. And you know, through my whole career, when I was a retailer, we did a lot with independent comics, and we sold a lot of independent comics. As a new website, First Comics News, does a lot with independent comics. In fact, I don't know that you've ever reviewed a mainstream comic.
I have, but very, very rarely.
Yeah.
No, it's not what I decided that I would try to be as accessible as possible. I do dabble, like every once in a while, if something I really like comes to pass. Sure. But the mainstream stuff doesn't need the exposure that something like I just showed you.
It's my feeling too. I worked for Newsarama. I worked for Comic Book Resources, and I was a reporter there. And they really have DC and Marvel covered, and they've got a lot of exclusives. And as a smaller news site, we carry all the important news from DC and Marvel. But if I can do something for AC Comics for an interview or spotlight their stuff, this could move their numbers in a way that would help them. Whereas me publishing something about Wolverine isn't ever going to move their numbers enough that they would ever notice.
Everything's advertising, right? And so the big thing is the big guys already have a lot of noise being put out. If anything, this is my criticism of DC and Marvel, I still generally think they don't do enough advertising of their current crop of books, right? I'm not talking just comic book websites. I just mean in general, right? I think they could actually do more. But if you're if you're a comic site, there's a lot of great books out on the market that don't get the love that they necessarily deserve. I just read, like I said, Once Upon a Time at the End of the World. It's a boom book. It's decent sized publisher. It's not the biggest. It's not Marvel DC. It's something like medium sized, right? The next one I'm going to review is going to be something I got from a Kickstarter from an even smaller thing, because that's how you build brands. You build them by getting like word of mouth. Like, hey, this stuff's pretty good. That's how you do it. Me saying Wolverine is good doesn't really, I mean, it adds to it. It doesn't hurt them, but
no.
But it doesn't, in the grand scheme of things. I would rather use my voice to look at people who are doing really, really cool stuff pre anything they may get in DC, Marvel, Image, Scout, you name it, right? There's just a lot of right. I'd rather do that because I think it's important to keep building talent, right? Doesn't matter who it is. And also, and maybe in a slightly more selfish point of view, is this: if I'm spending all this time helping people out, when it's my turn to put stuff out, people will help me.
Oh, absolutely. I've spent 30 years covering comics I started with Comic Buyer's Guide, and I also wrote for the Comic Retailer. And, I've been on the internet forever, doing this stuff since there was an internet. And when it came time to actually start publishing my own comic, one of the joys I had were the people that I actually formed decent relationships with, that I'd interviewed, that I enjoyed from the 80s and 90s. They gave us covers. So the people whose work I admired the most on a personal level from my own personal collection, those people were willing to do covers for us, and that meant the world to me.
Yeah, exactly.
It really did. And it does, it's just, and I don't even know if all the covers mean anything to the people who see them that they mean to me, but it means a lot to me, and so that part.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, it shows the relationships you've established in the industry, right?
Yeah.
And that's cool. And every once in a while, I look back and I look at some of the people I've had the pleasure of meeting, and I'm like, wow, I know these people. Wow, they might be my friends. I talked to Christina Z. Yesterday, and I told her about my master plan for the podcast, going on the road with this, starting in the summertime, right? So if I do run into you at some point, bud, we'll have to hang out. But that all said, she's like, oh, I can't wait for you to come to LA. And I'm like, wow, Christina Z, arguably one of the biggest pioneers breaking grounds, and we're having a great little conversation and about just hanging out. Good. That's awesome. Right at the end of the day, right?
Isn't it?
Yeah. right?
And that's the whole thing, is that the relationships mean so much. And when, and the fact that I can help people out. We do a panel. I've done a panel now for, I don't know, 13 years, 14 years at San Diego Comic-Con. We do it at WonderCon, and we did it 1 year in New York Comic-Con. How to get press coverage for small press publishers. Mm-hmm. And when I was at Archie, I was the public relations coordinator, and I was there for a decade. And I'm down on the floor with my son, and he picks up a comic that he absolutely adores called Anne Frankenstein.
Oh, cool.
Okay, and it's Anne Frank as a Frankenstein monster. It's a pretty simple joke. So I think I'm gonna cover this. This is fun. My son likes it. I'm sure other people would like it too. So I go and I talk to the creator, and he didn't have a website. And he didn't have a way for you to get the comic if you weren't standing directly in front of him at that convention. And my son, the next year, bought the second issue. And I think there were 3 published that we've seen so far. And my son's bought all 3. But it made me realize at that time that there are people who love the comics that they're creating, and they're creators, and they're artistic. They're all happy with what they're doing. But they didn't have the piece to get it out to the public, and that's what we do. That's what we do at the panel. We give a slight presentation of what looked for and what people actually want to cover, and how you can prepare your stuff to cover it. And then we do mostly questions and answers, where we try and help people specifically with some of their issues. And some of the stuff that's come along has been really, really cool. I mean, it's nice to help people. It's nice to build some relationships, and it's nice to see these people who were starting out, who didn't have their book out yet, and then see it go out into the world and see them publish it year after year after year.
Yeah, I know. Like, I think the most amazing thing, I've done this podcast now for nearly 8 years. And I think the thing that blows me away is, 2 things. How incredibly talented some of the people are on here. Sometimes I'm wondering what I'm doing here, like sometimes. Right. And then there's the other part of this where it's like, but I'm always amazed how many people don't know how to get their word out. Like that to me is stunning. You know what I mean?
Well, I think that it helped that I was a retailer.
Yeah.
And because I was a retailer and I was a reporter, and I interviewed Michael Silverclate before, so I had a relationship with him when the position opened up. They hired me at Archie. But after being at Archie and being a retailer and seeing the different sides, I realized that a lot of comic creators don't understand who they're selling to. And so that's part of the problem. Because if you're selling to Diamond, the customer who buys it at the end of this whole trail, who likes your comic and is your fan, isn't your customer.
No.
Your customer is the retailer.
Yep.
Because your retailer is the one who orders it through Diamond, and your retailer becomes the gatekeeper on this. Because if the retailer doesn't have any interest in your product, or doesn't like your product, doesn't order it. If he doesn't order it, the customers don't see it. If you attract the fan who actually sees you at a convention and wants it, you'll tell the retailer, buy a copy, and the retailer will order 1 copy, put it in their pull box, and won't actually support your product. You know what I mean? They'll service their own customer. So you really need to understand that, your first job is to create this stuff and get it all ready to go out. But after most creators are done creating, they're on to the next project to create, and they don't understand that that's just when the work starts.
Yes.
You've got to market it to Diamond. You've got to get Diamond to be interested in carrying your product. Then you've got to market it to the retailer. And then ultimately you have to market the exact same product again to the customer, because the retailer needs to sell through your product to order it again. If they order only 3 and they sell 2 and they keep 1, but their discount is 40% off cover, and they're stuck with 1/3 of their order, your product didn't work for them.
Here's the other thing that needs to be said here before we continue. The caveat here is you got to understand who your customer is. If you're a Kickstarter, it's your fans, right? If you're trying to get into the comic shop, it's Diamond or any other retailer you choose to do business with. They don't care. They don't care how it sells. All they care about is that it sells. It's still the onus is on you to get the word out there. if you are an independent somewhere that's not necessarily doing Kickstarter, then maybe who you're selling to are libraries, like maybe places like Scholastic, right?
Yes.
And again, all of these things have different needs and different audiences. And you have to take the time at some point. This is why when you see a lot of traditional published books, they take 2 years to hit the market because they're busy looking for the customer base for the best impact on the book. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, if you don't have a marketing plan for your product, it'll hit the market. No one will be looking for it. No one cares. And by the time you've finished your press run and it's you said, okay, well, this is all the market, it becomes hard to attract people for the next issue if you weren't able to sell the first one.
Yeah. Especially retailers and bigger chains. Now,
yes,
as
absolutely.
a fan, yeah, all of this comes from, and I say it like that just because, folks, there are different goals in this, and there are different goals, but you have to keep in mind who is your customer. If you're on Kickstarter, it's collectors, other people.
Right.
If it's Diamond's going to care that a certain cutoff point of books are sold every time, and if that cutoff is not met, your book will get canceled, inevitably. That is why books get canceled. Right? They don't hit a certain number or threshold. And when you're in bigger companies, bigger thresholds are needed to maintain the company's bottom line, which is why,
well,
again,
I think there's another point that happens with books getting canceled too, is that they're expensive to produce comics.
Yes.
And so you have to front that, you know what I mean? And so once you've put the money out to produce the comic, then you've got to sell the comic. If you're not hitting the diamond threshold, you're probably not making enough money to support the people who are working on the book.
Yeah,
I mean, you do hear about publishers just before they go out of business not paying their creators
because at the end,
they overextended themselves with the money that they had spent at the printer. They overextended themselves with the waiting for that check for Diamond that turned out to be smaller after their damages and returns. And the minimum print order was higher than they got sales for Diamond, and so they were stuck with extra books. And there are all sorts of things where if you're not hitting the minimums at Diamond, you're probably not being able to pay everyone who works for you. When you're doing a Kickstarter, you get more of the money, so you can sell fewer of the books and still be okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, and all of this, when you guys are deciding to which avenue to go down, by the way, this is true in like mainstream publishing for books, novels, and things like that as well. It's the same concept, right? You're dealing with distributors. If you want to go into bigger chains, again, they're looking at thresholds, and books cost to print. It's just there's numbers.
Absolutely.
Right? There's just numbers. So you gotta, if you aren't thinking at least a little bit in those terms, or maybe I should say this, if you don't have this as your strong suit, it might be a good idea to partner with somebody that does think a little bit like that, because at that point, that way you balance it out at least a little bit, right? So I say all this as someone who's learned some bumps and bruises the hard way, and and also maybe the final point that should be said, and this is the other thing too. At the end of the day, you need to make a certain threshold of money to make a career and a living doing this. But in the journey to becoming that, because there is a process with this as well.
Right, absolutely.
Right, there's a process. Your goal may not be to make, and this is going to sound counterintuitive to everything we're just talking about, but when you're starting, making money on a particular book may not be the initial goal. Maybe creating an outreach and audience. I would not recommend, if that's your goal, to go to Diamond first, right? Maybe
no. And in fact, we published 2 comics to start with, and the goal was to.
Yeah.
But I mean, at least that was our initial goal, and we made enough money, and we rolled that over into the next comics. And so then we were publishing, 3 comics, and then it was 5, and now we're going to have 11 in this next, which which is a larger number than we were originally planning. But it certainly helps with the shipping. The shipping cuts down astronomically as you gang ship these things.
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. But and again, I just bring all this up, folks, to understand where we're coming from here. Depending on the route you go down, you have to look at your goals, and your numbers become very different depending upon the goals. And money is not necessarily the only end goal here, but
no, of course not.
But you have to be. But again, you got to make enough money to justify making the books, and that can't be avoided, right? But also recognize your goals. And this is going back, and then we'll go deeper into your Kickstarters and how you got into the industry this way. We'll go into that a little bit. It's just all I'm saying is sum this up. What we're talking about here is have a very clear understanding of what your goals are.
Yes.
Who's buying your comics or books, or it can be any art, not just that. It can be anything. But since there's a Croc and Comics, who's your core audience? And number 3, what are you doing once you have 1 and 2 figured out? What are you doing to increase 1 and 2 outside of going to shows and meeting people there? Like, do you have mailing lists? Do you have how are you interacting? Do you have a platform? Do you have some way of reaching out to people on a regular basis?
Absolutely. We have, we're going to be at 32 comics we've published at the end of this Kickstarter over the course of 3 years, 3.5. Yeah, 3.5. And so that's a lot of comics.
That's legit impressive.
But you get to a point where the back issues become a lot to deal with too. And so we're trying to figure out, what do we want to do with our trades? What's the right price point? How to put them together? And we're working with that too, because we haven't done trade paperbacks. We're partnering. We're looking to, partner with someone else to see what we can do about other distribution methods. Because right now we're 100% Kickstarter.
Yeah.
And so it's, we offer the back issues when we do the next Kickstarter, if you want the back issues. And so, you know what I mean? But we're up to issue 6 on, Agent Kirby. And so, now that's becoming larger and larger. Do we want to do a trade? Do we want to split the trade at 4? Do we at 5? What price point would be a barrier? And what price point is the right price point so people would pick up a trade and be happy with it. And we've had a lot of discussions between the 3 of us, and we have not come up with an answer yet. And so we're not offering trades.
No, and that's fair. And when you get to trades, then you'll be like looking at stuff like maybe Scholastic, maybe like some of the other bigger distribution chains could be like, hey, we got a book that we think fits your audience. Let's talk. Right. And they'll hear you out. They'll always hear you out. Right. So,
well, I mean, the material is done at this point.
Yeah.
So that makes it easier, because there is no waiting for material to arrive. There is no waiting for no faith that we will actually produce it. We're ready. That stuff's ready to go. And so we could do that. We just haven't figured out what's the right move for us, because we want to do something where, it bring in new readers, and we don't want to put stuff out there to put it out.
No, and that's fair, right? Although I will say there is one last thing I should mention: the fact that you have so many books does attract people to you a little bit as well. Because I know this, when I go to a comic convention and I see someone with 1 book, I don't belittle that, because I know how hard it is to put even just 1 book together. Right. But when I go to someone that's got like 6 or 7 books on their table, right, there's just a subconscious thing of like, they're invested in doing this. Like, they're really, really invested. And I think the more I noticed this with my books, when I've done my books at shows, when I had 1 book, I did X amount of dollars. When I had 2 books, that went up. When I have 3 books, that went up even more. It's just something about that quantity of having material sometimes on the table actually increases your sales.
Oh yeah. Well, you see the rack right back there. It's
Oh yeah,
10
I
feet by
know.
10
I
feet.
know.
That's just one of each cover. That is not multiples of anything we've published.
Yeah. No, and that's why, like, that's
Because
super.
everything we publish has some, you know, has had, because Kickstarter, they're always variant covers, and what everyone
Absolutely.
does variant covers now. You can't get a DC comic that doesn't have a variant cover of any brand, no matter what the circulation is anymore.
I think that's actually one of DC's. So I have two gripes with DC right now. There's two of them, and all right, not saying anything they're bad about any of the creators doing the books, because I get that that's not entirely in their hands. I am sick to death of looking at Batman every time I look at the DC section, because now it's everywhere. All right, where they used to have a lot more variety of different books.
They're servicing their customer base.
Oh,
Batman books they
absolutely.
wouldn't make anymore, and so they although there are a lot of Batman books, and that's obvious to point out. I mean, you know, it could be half their publishing, but it's because there are people who want them. If there weren't people who want them, they'd stop. And when you say, "Oh, there are too many Batman books," now you got Mark Silvestri doing a Batman book. Well, everyone wants the Mark Silvestri Batman book, so I don't know that, you know what I mean. If you said no, we're cutting it off here, you wouldn't get that.
But okay, but there is something to be said about taking a property and pushing it to such an nth degree. Like and the reason why I say that like that is I look at the fact that right now I'm a big Green Lantern fan. There is no Green Lantern book right now. There's no Green Lantern book right now. There is no Legion. I don't think there's a Legion book right now. I could be wrong, but I don't think there's a Legion book right now. There's a or at least there's no Teen Titans book right now. Right?
I know their Teen Titans is just finishing up with the miniseries now, and then they're going to come back and replace the Justice League.
Okay, cool. I like that.
The thing is that it's really a market. If they used to have multiple Green Lantern books.
Oh, absolutely. At once upon a time, it used to be like,
and it wasn't long ago there were multiple Green Lantern books.
Not that long.
And believe me, if Green Lantern sold better than Batman, there would be 20 Green Lantern books.
I'm not debating that.
It's not like you get a Batman comic instead of Legion of Superheroes.
No,
because they'd publish both if people would buy the Legion of Superheroes.
Yeah. Oh.
They're about to do another run on Doom Patrol, and I'm going to be there.
Oh, nice. I did not know they were doing Doom Patrol. Right.
Yeah, so there's going to be another run on Doom Patrol. I'm looking forward to that.
I hope it's good.
If it did well enough, they'd never have stopped any of them.
Oh, well, sometimes they do let projects like take a break. Every once in a while, they let property rest.
That's when sales are low. That's not when sales are high.
No.
They give it a break because the sales drop so low. They think that the property needs to refresh.
Yes.
If they, well, I mean, look at the way it used to be. X-Men was a reprint book forever before Len Wein revamped it, and then Chris Claremont took it over.
Oh, yeah.
They were reprinting the older stories because they couldn't sell enough. And when the property got hot, there are 20,000 X-Men books. X-Men is like Batman.
Legitimately, there's sometimes I look. I was trying to find, like, honest to God, I was trying to find the last mainstream comic I did review was Miracle Man. I did do a Miracle Man review a while ago, right? The reason why I settled on Miracle Man actually came down to this. I was looking for just one book that was just by itself, that I didn't feel like I was invested in a bunch of other titles for Marvel. That's always been the problem with the X-Men, is there are some individual X books that are in its own universe, but if you're trying to come in and try to figure out what that is, that can be daunting, right? So I was like, yeah, give me one Marvel book that's just by itself I can enjoy without having an umpteen titles with, and that's why I settled on Miracle Man. I mean, Neil Gaiman doesn't hurt as well, don't get me wrong, but that's why I went with.
But Miracle. I mean, I still read Flash. I still read Batman. I still read Justice League when they published it. I read Teen Titans. I'm into mainstream comics. I read Captain America every month. I read the X-Men. But that doesn't stop me from loving independent comics and reading a lot of independent comics too.
I love mainstream stuff too. Like Immortal Hulk was one of my favorite runs of the last 6-7 years. That was a fantastic little book. I think Venom was great in the last few months. Like the original Krakoa run of all the X books, I enjoyed a it was such a unique take on the X-Men. I love JLA. I love Legion of Superheroes, Teen Titans. Like there's some great mainstream books. Now I'm at that point in my reading cycle where I like more of independent stuff because because I've read those stories before, if you know what I mean. It's like even if they're relaunches, there's some similarity. If you see an origin story told over and over again, after a while, it's like, okay, I've read the story before. I want something a little different. And that's where I'm at in my reading journey. But I don't dismiss anybody. Look, I actually look at it like this. If a creator is working on a mainstream books, what that tells me is that the company trusts that creator to do a good job with that book. And that's what that actually means, right? Those people don't get in there by accident. Those people don't get in there by mistake. Those people are very good at what they do. And more often than not, are fans of what they're doing too.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, I think that if you're taking over, say you're taking over Savage Avengers, and David, who took that over, was an indie guy before he took over Savage Avengers. You have to, there's already an audience for that book. You have to familiarize yourself with what happened before. The editor on that book was the editor before you got there. He had an idea and a direction he wanted the book to go in. And so while they trust you to write the book, there are parameters there in a mainstream book where you can't kill everyone off. You can't, of course, they do kill off a lot of characters at DC and Marvel, but the characters have to be available to cross over into other books. The characters have to be, there are a lot of rules. And when you get to indie books, it's usually a small handful of people who do the book, or sometimes just one person. And they have a lot more freedom to express their comic in different ways. And so when you get to indie books, you get a very different flavor of a comic.
Absolutely. You get, there's some, I will say this, I think it's from a mainstream, I think the hardest thing with the mainstream thing and what you got to recognize is very rarely do you get an act 3 in a mainstream book. You get an amazing act 1 and almost like a continuous act 2, right? The main story, a story arc may conclude, but it always will go back to a certain status quo. Like Bruce Wayne will always be Batman. That's just the way it is, and that's fine.
Right.
Clark Kent will always.
But Dick Grayson won't always be Robin.
Yeah.
He's been Nightwing longer than he was Robin.
Yes, he is one of those very, very awesome exceptions to that rule. Right.
And John Stewart, the replacement Green Lantern, is arguably equally as popular as Hal Jordan.
I actually think,
certainly after the Justice League, the cartoon.
In my honest opinion, John Stewart's the real money in Green Lantern. Like honestly, if I were to do a movie, he would be the one I'd do it with.
So it's not always that the things have to stay the same. Sometimes they change and they turn out to be different and better. But yes, for the most part. When they do things like they replace, with a character with a replacement character, they've replaced every single character with a replacement at some point. The original character always comes back. They just they'd replace Superman with his son, and Superman just came back. But that's comic trope. The Batman's back is broken, and Azrael becomes Batman. James Rhodes becomes Iron Man.
Yeah, and that's
John Walker became Captain America.
And that's I think that's the thing about, there's a cycle with comics, whereas an indie will like you can get a full act 1, act 2, act 3, and that's it. And I think that's where the indie has the advantage. But again, you can't argue the power of a brand like Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, X-Men, Deadpool, like you name it, right? You name it, right? They've been around for a very long time. For a reason. They've connected with an incredible mass of people. Spider-Man, like it's one of the most well-known characters ever, right?
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Yeah, awesome character, right? He also he goes through a cycle. He's single. He's married to Mary Jane. He makes a deal. Okay, I'm not crazy about the making the deal with the devil part. But that's just me. That's my own personal opinion there.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that.
I don't think anybody like that, but the whole point is he goes through a cycle, and because the character is popular and people know him for being a certain way, and when they wanted to experiment, they went and created they kind of did that in Ultimate Spider-Man. They created the Spider-Verse kind of by.
Right.
Here's an interesting thought. Here's a question for you. Do you think
Sure.
Marvel has hit the point DC did in the 70s, where they have multiple universes, they have a multitude of concepts that they may someday have to streamline again? That's why DC created the very first Crisis. We're not going to talk about all the other ones that came.
Well, no. You're talking about the first Crisis comic, but the first Crisis was when they met the Justice Society in Justice League 21, and then every year there was a Crisis where they crossed over.
Yes,
and every summer, because the books weren't published monthly, books were published bi-monthly, and then monthly over the 3 months of the summer when kids were out of school.
Yeah.
So they were publishing them 8-9 times a year. And in the summer, you got the crossover of the Justice League and Justice Society. And so they crossed over with the Captain Marvel universe. They crossed over with the Quality universe. And so then Crisis was just the Crisis 12-issue comic was just a continuation of those universe crossovers where they collapsed everything. But I think the thing is that in the Golden Age, you had a lot of powerless characters and you got a lot of magic. And like Green Lantern, Alan Scott Green Lantern was a magic character.
Yes.
Dr. Fate was a magic character. They didn't, and Julie Swartz, who revived DC, was a science fiction editor before he came to DC. So all the characters became science fiction characters. The Atom wasn't just a little guy who punched people hard. He could shrink to the power of an atom because he was a scientist. Green Lantern wasn't a guy who had a magic lamp that was turned into a ring. He became an intergalactic policeman. All the characters ended up with some more of a sci-fi vibe to them. And that was okay because they had, when the comic code was imposed and all the comics were canceled, they're picking up a whole new generation of kids. And there was a gap in publishing because Batman, Wonder Woman, and Superman, who were continuously published, they didn't reboot those when they rebooted everything else. No, they just kept rolling. There was no new continuity. There was no new origin. There was no, they were just taking the Flash, who had been exposed to heavy and gained super speed, which is, and all of a sudden now it's science fiction. He was bathed in a variety of chemicals in a lab as a scientist, and so when they're doing all these other reboots, they're doing soft reboots. They're not doing a full reboot. You know what I mean? You go from 1 month to getting Superman and Batman to the next month getting Superman and Batman. There isn't a 5-year, 10-year gap where they weren't publishing these characters where they're going to give you a new version. They're saying, okay, well, now all of a sudden we have the new 52 and they're just younger.
Yep.
You know what I mean? But it doesn't really do that. You know what I mean? And that's why none of these things really hold, is because they're all just gimmicks. And, you hope they run for a few years. But you're not, the characters are somewhat stagnant over time, but that's not a bad thing. Mickey Mouse, probably the most successful character out there, that's been around forever. And while he's changed his look marginally over the years, I mean, drastically from the first till now, but I mean, updated him, it's always marginal, it's always small. They've been able to keep him relevant all these years and make a fortune licensing and selling him in a variety of different ways, for 100 years.
Yeah, and you don't mess with the mouse. Let's tell you that. Like Disney is a juggernaut in more ways than one. It's just one of those things. Like I think when you start as an indie, you have to learn how to tell a story, and if you can prove it, if you do it well, and if you can do that well enough. Bigger companies will look at you and say, hey, we'll give you a shot. Now, not everybody has great experiences in the bigger companies. Some people are better on their own, right? And there are people like one of my favorite creators that I reviewed not too long ago is Terry Moore. I love his individual stuff. I think he's fantastic. He's good in mainstream stuff, but I like him better as an indie. And I'm sure he likes the paycheck of the regular stuff, but his indie stuff's where he shines.
one of the indie books that I really, really liked when I was first a retailer was The Badger and Nexus from Capital
Yes.
Comics. Okay. And they went to First Comics and they had a fabulous run there. Mike Barron, who wrote both those books, went mainstream after that. And he wrote The Flash, and his run on The Flash was wonderful. He had a different take on Wally West's The Flash, and he needed calories and he had trouble and his life wasn't good. You know what I mean? And then he took on The Punisher. And The Punisher had been a villain for most of his life. And there was a really good miniseries, you know, but he's got the look of Black Terror, you know, with the all black costume with the skull. And he's based on the Destroyer character from the pulp novels. And they found a way to make him interesting and unique. And, you know, even though he was somewhat of a derivative character, to give him his own feel and his own story. And, you know, they just took away his skull in the comics, but I mean, they made that iconic.
Yeah, like I said, but that's what it is. And then you go, and however long you're in mainstream, and while you're as a creator, while you're there, make the most of your time. There will come a time when you're not as in demand anymore, and then you go back to whatever it is that made you start. Like there's a cycle to this even as a business. So, I mean,
absolutely. You know, because when you're you know, you get to write your own ticket. And then eventually that group of fans isn't, you know, wants to see something new, and the new fans don't appreciate you as much. Neil Adams was probably the hottest artist DC had in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Without question.
Mm-hmm.
And then he did the continuity stuff and it didn't sell. His art didn't change. And then you can say, okay, well, that was true. But then he came back and he did Batman, you know, and the Batman sold, but it didn't sell like it did in the 70s.
Well, continuity had a little bit of an in joke, at least the second time around. No, not so much the first time, but the second time. I bless Neil Adams. He did everything in continuity, but sometimes those books would take forever. I am still waiting for. I like legit. Well, the book I read in continuity was Armor. I thought Armor was. And I loved Armor and Megalith in particular. They were fantastic. I am still waiting for the special where Armor beats Rage. It has been since 1990. I don't think I'm seeing that story anytime soon. And I'm not knocking Neil for this at all. Things happen, things change, things evolve. But I mean, circumstances, I think, has conspired against him with continuity. But no, you're right. Like he had a shelf life. Like in the 70s, he was the hottest artist in the industry. In the 80s, that became Frank Miller. That became George Perez. Right.
Right.
That right. And then in the 90s, that became 90s. Okay, that became Mark Silvestri,
Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee. Everyone who ended up at Image was the hottest thing in the world at Marvel.
Yeah, So that was the 90s, and the 2000s. That was hold on, let me think about this. There's a couple people I could say. Mike McCone was big, although maybe not the biggest. Okay. He did the Ultimates with Mark Miller. I can't remember his name. It's driving me nuts. He was as big as it got. John Cassaday, another one, as big as it got.
Yes.
Right. So there's a cycle with everybody, right? They come in and even as writers, right? In the 70s, like Chris Claremont was the hottest thing in the 80s, but in the 90s it was Mark Waid. In the 90s it was Mark Waid and Grant Morrison. And then in the 2000s, it was Jeff Johns, right? And Kurt Busiek. And again, there are, with everybody, right? There's a time and a place for everybody. Everything comes, everything goes. Longevity at a high level in the industry is a very hard thing to do. There are some people that do it. Like I mentioned George Perez. Yes. He was never as hot as he was in the 80s post that run, but he always sold a certain amount of books no matter what, right? And that's rare, right? That's very rare.
Well, I mean, when he went from at Marvel, he was tremendously hot. Probably It was him and John Byrne. I
Yep.
mean, it was really apples and oranges, which you liked better, because they drew in a slightly different style. They weren't, they were superheroes, but they had unique tendencies to their styles. When he went to DC, he was it at DC. You know what I mean?
Oh no, he was the man.
And Titans was a book that never sold, ever. You know, in its whole history, it was a marginal seller at best. I loved Teen Titans when I was a kid. But it wasn't like it was everyone's favorite. But New Titans, when that came out with George Perez and Marv Wolfman, that was it. I mean, that was the best-selling comic. You know, the changes they made to Dick Grayson to make him Nightwing have stuck. How often does that happen? Stuck for 40 years.
And by the way, the unsung hero of DC in the 80s is probably Marv Wolfman. Probably.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, probably.
No, I think he was very, very popular. So he was sung at the time.
no, but when you look at all the movie properties that are coming out today, like like the hand he had in all of that, he wasn't always directly responsible for all of them, but when you look at based on characters created by, his name is there an awful lot. You're like, holy, like more than most, and you're looking at that and you're like, damn, man, like as he was sung, no, don't get me wrong, he was really popular, but he might even look in the post era, he might be better now than he was then, and that's saying something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
I mean, yeah, but the thing is that everyone, you know, there's always a new flavor of the month, and the number of people who have the multi-decade career is in the handful. You know, people who do that, because when you're the hot talent, no one's ever seen someone who writes like you. No one's ever seen someone who drew like you. No one's ever seen that much energy. No one's ever seen people put things together that way. But after enough pages come out, people say, well, I've seen that. You know, I've seen all your tricks, and they get entertained by someone who has new and different tricks. Before The Walking Dead, who would want to read hundreds of issues of a zombie book?
Yeah, exactly.
But arguably one of the most impressive comic creations of of its day. You know, the comics sold well, and the multiple TV series, and the multiple printings on the book, and then re-releasings in color, and you know, a whole career for you know, people. It was just, you know, it's amazing.
Oh no, it's like Walking Dead's incredible. Now, personally, I'm a bigger fan of Invincible than I am of Walking Dead. That's just a personal opinion. But no, you cannot deny.
Well, Invincible is superheroes, and so it's closer to home.
It's also happier. Like I like Invincible's is a much happier book. I think to me, but again, that again, it's personal taste. Sometimes you want, like, I like silly, stupid stuff, right? I like that. That's how I like being entertained, right? But Walking Dead is not that. Walking Dead is and it's fantastic. It is an excellent. I call it like a monster comic, like zombies, Frankenstein.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
It is a monster comic, and it might be the best one of the last 30 years. Easy, right?
To me, Walking Dead had the same thing going for it that Game of Thrones had as a viewer. As soon as you liked a character, they killed him. When you thought you knew who the star of the show was, they were dead.
That was part of the charm. I think, to me, I think Walking Dead, did it better.
Yeah,
right?
No, I know. But I mean, if you're watching Game of Thrones, you think Jon Stark is the hero of the whole show until they chop off his head.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then that's not what the show's about.
No, the show is like this grim. The novels are so I read the novels before the show ever came out.
Yeah,
I'll probably never see book 7. I've come to the conclusion that I will never see the last like 2 books in the series, but who knows? I've been wrong before, but I might never see it. I think with the way he wrote those, it's hard to keep a coherent narrative. Walking Dead does that better, because it's not just about one person. It's about a whole group of people, and you can go to different people from time to time and still have the overall prevailing narrative in there. But even with that, he also wrapped it up. Like, he told the story to its conclusion in the comic, right?
Yeah.
So there is an act 1, and act 2, and act 3. So he has that going for them as well. So I think it wasn't just because he was defying expectations. It was also because the narrative was incredibly strong. The idea was super sound. He had characters, good and bad. The governor was a freaking monster, man. Just like, that was my favorite villain of the entire series, right? But it was just like, you had compelling characters that made you feel stuff. And unlike Game of Thrones, you didn't feel like the narrative, it didn't feel like he pulled too many dominoes out at once. He pulled a few, he did pull them, but it was like, it felt like it was a little bit more, he let other characters breathe before he yanked it out. Right. So I think he did it better, to be honest with you. There was a certain repetitiveness to The Walking Dead in terms of what the caveat was, but again, that's me nitpicking. It's not like me saying the book was terrible, because it wasn't. It was a great run, start to finish.
But in both those cases, you'd never seen someone do something like that. You know what I mean? Killing off the main characters and keeping the book going, keeping the TV show going, keeping it going as everyone you care about disappears, and introducing new characters constantly.
Let me think about this. Not in comics, no. Not in television, no. There are some literary ones I've read, but yeah, it's not common at all. It's really rare.
And so that's what was so compelling about that, is that they came up with a different concept that was unique.
Yeah.
And it drew people in, and people like new and shiny.
Yeah, it defied expectations. Now, though, if anybody wants to do that, they have to be smarter about it, right? It has to come in like
you can't do it again and do less than. If someone decides they want to do the next zombie comic, they got to find something that makes it unique and better than, in at least some way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, so I mean, that is it. We probably should talk about your comics in a little bit more detail before we wrap it. But actually, I'm going to ask one last question before we get to that point. What was the book that made you want to make a comic? What was the book you read that thought, this is so freaking cool, I want to do something like it, or something?
Well, this was it. I was attracted to comics as a kid, and I was attracted to the one that really attracted me the most when I was young was Teen Titans. And I really, really liked Teen Titans. And when they canceled the book, I ended up getting the Flash to see Kid Flash again. And it didn't happen much, but that was the goal. And when I was in junior high, I had already read that Jim Shooter had started at age 13 at DC doing Legion of Superheroes. So I spent the summer writing a comic strip, a whole comic book, and so I wrote the comic, and in handwriting, I sent them to DC, hoping they would buy my comic and publish it. And I got a very nice rejection letter from DC. And I wrote something else and sent it off to DC, and I got another rejection letter. Then I decided Marvel, and I wrote to Marvel. And these days, you were actually getting handwritten letters back from the publisher with your rejection. These weren't photocopies. They weren't, they were treating me like a reasonable human being, nicely. But they were rejecting the stuff that I did. And at one point, it dawned on me that it was taking me 3 months to write the comic strip, the comic script. And if it took me 3 months to write a script, if they actually ever hired me, I would never be able to actually write their monthly comic.
That's fair.
And so when I was a retailer, there were a lot of black and white comics. There was a big boom in black and white comics. And so I thought that I could actually produce a comic. And I thought that I could write this and we could use local talent and who would draw it, and I could produce the comic. And so we set off to make the first comic. And as we would produce each page, I would put it in the pull list for my customers. So they got one page of a comic, each week when they came and picked up their comics. And I ended up getting divorced. And when I got divorced, I didn't have the comic store to sell the comics. And I believe it's been quite a few years. The minimum print was 1,000 comics. And between what I could sell myself in the store and what I was in a convention every single weekend as a retailer. I figured I could go to different conventions. I could move enough units between an account at Capital Comics to sell to other retailers, to what I could sell in my store, to what I could sell at conventions, that I could justify this, that I could at least break even doing this. And so the plan was to produce the comic. And it took me 30 years to publish it because I got divorced. And I didn't think I could hit the minimum print runs. And I didn't know that, what it had to do. But once we were doing the Kickstarters, after in our fourth Kickstarter, I finally printed the original book that was 30 years old.
I'm going to just give you a clap.
So,
let
me see it here. This is the original comic that we produced. I'm sorry. Right
yeah.
30 years ago, with the original art. And I had it re-lettered professionally because when I did it myself, I did all my own Macintosh. Printed them and taped them to the board. And we had it recolored with professional colorists. But it was literally 30 years from the year that we put this together and gave it out as an ash can. And I made ash cans. When we were done with all 20 pages, we, went to the printer and they printed it up, and stapled it and put a little red cover on it.
That's awesome.
And we sold it in the store, the ash can, but we never got to print the actual comic. And so that was part of the joy. And now I'm printing a new, now we're doing, this character was called Lynx. Yes. And we sold it in the store. And the store name was Paper Hero Comics. And now as G-Man Comics, it's one of our regular titles. And so we're putting out the second title with this next Kickstarter. And he was a supporting character. It's a couple. Lynx is one of those words that ends with an X. So yes. The singular and the plural are both the same. Sort of like deer, where deer doesn't end with an X, but the one or the herd is still deer. Mm-hmm. And with lynx, it doesn't ever become lynxes, and it's a mispronunciation. It's just still lynx.
Well, I think lynx sounds like a cooler name than deer would. Like I could just imagine it coming.
Yeah, no, I get that. We didn't come up with the character deer, but yeah.
No, but dude, like I know how hard it is. Like for me, I went through a heck of a hard time myself just to get my comic. I did a comic back before Kickstarter, and before I ever got going the way it did now. And I remember it's hard. Like it's really hard. Just to do one is super hard. And I mean, it took you 30 years. I mean, I got to give my hat to you because a lot of people give up, but you didn't.
Well, I mean, technically I wasn't working on this for 30 years. I mean, technically, but I actually published that first comic, and Justin Vargas, who was the artist on this, was one of my customers in my comic shop 30 years ago. His younger brother, Augie, had stayed in touch with me over these 30 years because we would see each other at Comic-Con and WonderCon.
Okay.
And he kept up with me. And I had lost touch with Justin. But once I was publishing comics, I had to publish. This one was... this comic was a giveaway. If you bought all 5 of the other comics in the Kickstarter, we gave you a copy of this because it was 30 years old. It wasn't, what I mean? It wasn't the same stuff as what we were doing. It wasn't the same continuity, but he got me back in touch with his brother, Justin. And 30 years later, I finally put the comic in his hands, the comic that we'd worked on together. And so that meant a lot to me.
Probably to him too. Probably to him too.
I hope. Yeah.
Oh, I know. I know. You wonder,
But
right?
that's been the joy of publishing is that. But I mean, what really happened was I'm a huge Mighty Crusaders fan, as I mentioned earlier. And I wrote the book for Tomorrow's, the MLJ Companion, with Paul Castiglia and John Cook. And I was doing a series of fake mock covers with one of my characters, the Simon and Kirby character, and the MLJ characters. And there was an artist, Mitch Kwok, who would just do drawings that would be fake, mock covers. And then I wrote like a little solicitation blurb about what the story was that went with it. And we were just putting those on the internet, just, no comic, just a little cover and a little blurb. And, it was fun. And Eric Bennett, who's one of my partners here, says, you got to meet Gilbert.
Okay.
And so he introduced me to Gilbert Monsanto, and Gilbert has an arena on Facebook, and you put your character in the arena against other characters. And
yeah,
I think it's in groups of 10.
I've seen that arena. I have. Sometimes,
and
sometimes
so
I comment.
Then the fans vote who wins, and the winner of the arena is featured in a mock cover that he does, which was the same idea. There's no real comic to it. It's just a comic cover. And Gilbert said, we could make some comics together. And I said, no, we can't do that. We can't. I already went down that road. We can't sell enough. We can't do this. That's not really possible. And he did the art on the first issue, and we put together a Kickstarter. And that first issue took a year to produce between the two of us because we didn't know what we were doing. And Eric ended up lettering that. And Jim said, I'd like to do production on the book. And I said, well, we've done other things together and we're friends. And sure, I don't know what you're going to do, but sure, we'd love to have you with us. And Jim was invaluable. I had no idea at the time, but the production work, I'm thrilled with the quality we put out, and it's all because of Jim's standards and making his understanding of what the printer needs and how to put everything together for the printer and what is good enough and what isn't, because I didn't know that much detail in Photoshop and in what the printer needed that he has a grasp on. And he has a team of proofreaders, and so that our comic has 5-6 people read it before it ever goes to press, so that we don't have some small typo or some mistake. Not to say we've never found one ever anywhere that wasn't exactly 100% perfect, but for 31 comics, I think there's one mistake that I wish that we had caught.
It happens. It's going to happen no matter how many people you have look at it. And sometimes it's a mistake. All of you are like, it's right there. Why did no one see it? And you'll never know, but it's just how it goes, right?
Yeah. And so we started off, I was making one comic, and that was going to be it. And while Gilbert was working on that, Alan showed up, and he had been coloring some pieces of artwork, older artwork, and we were sharing them on the internet, and it was really good stuff. And he had a little manga version of a character, and I said, "Oh, could you draw one of my characters in that kind of version?" And he did that, and that was one of the covers we used on the first issue. And he said, I can do things in a standard style too. And I said, okay, well, here's my character links that I had wanted to publish. What can you do with this? And the piece was gorgeous. I couldn't believe how nice that piece came out. And so I immediately started him on issue 2. Agent Kirby. We hadn't even produced issue 1. And I wasn't doing a links book. I was just doing Agent Kirby. I only had the one character. And so he started working on issue 2, and he was working like a demon on that. His issue was done at about the same time as Gilbert's issue. And Gilbert wasn't just working for me. He was working for other people and doing all sorts of stuff. And so that's why it took us a year to get there. But like in this next Kickstarter, Gilbert's doing 3 of our books. And so we're doing it 6 months later, we're doing 3 comics with Gilbert. And I think the next one he's doing 4. So it wasn't really a matter of, how much speed Gilbert, took or how much time. It was just really, he was doing a lot of different projects and now he's doing more for us.
And there was a learning curve for you guys too, as you mentioned, the first time around. So maybe it worked out in a good way that he was taking the time he was taking, because now I'm going to say it's with what you're doing now, because then right? Because now, I mean, there's always challenges with projects, but you have an idea what the expectations are, what those challenges might be. And now that you know that, it makes it easier to work with people. So everybody's faster. Everybody is on their A game, and you can regularly produce good work.
Oh yeah. So in addition to doing the G-Man comics, and we've got a Kickstarter starting on February 1st. So you can go to our website, g-man-comics.com, and you can see all of our characters and what we're doing. And also it has a link to the Kickstarter, so you can sign up to be notified when the Kickstarter goes live. But and believe me, I wish that you'd all come see that.
Yes. We'll give that a second here. Did I get that right?
Sure. g-man-comics.com.
Yep. Was that right?
Hold on one second. It is. Yes, it's perfect. Sorry about that.
No worries, Rick. They gave me an award for this. Okay, they gave me an award. Good, I almost know what I'm doing. I almost do.
So, you and I have a mutual friend, which is how we got to know each other, Tim Chismar.
Yep.
And with Tim Chismar, I've produced 2 comics also for restaurants in Las Vegas. One for Evil Pie, the Evil Knievel themed pizzeria. And so we did an Evil Knievel themed comic. And the other is a tiki bar, the Golden Tiki, and we made a comic for them. They had a whole story on the back of their menu about the whole lore of the Golden Tiki, and we turned that into a comic. So
that's fantastic. That's a great idea for a restaurant, actually.
Yeah. So I'm sure they're busily selling those to their customers, which is different than doing it on Kickstarter and different than doing it through Diamond.
Again, it really doesn't matter. Like, I think one of the most important things about today's day and age is there's no wrong way of getting your comics out there. Yes. Right? Printing has made it so that it is possible to publish runs anywhere. Right? That Golden Tiki comic might be like 9 kinds of awesome, and it sells at a restaurant on at least a regular basis, and it's a cool novelty for that restaurant. Right?
Well, when I was a kid, there was Bob's Big Boy, and they gave away free comics like Bob's Big Boy.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean,
and there was a different Bob's Big Boy comic every whatever amount of time it was. I don't know how long it took for them to get the next one, because we didn't eat Bob's Big Boy regularly. But every time I went, there was a different comic than the one I was there before.
Exactly. So I mean, it's not a bad idea. It's a fantastic idea. And really, if you get like 1 million people, I'm not saying that's the number, but let's say 10,000 people reading that comic. That's 10,000 people reading your comic. It doesn't matter what it looks like, right?
Well, in addition to that, hopefully there's transition. Hopefully
absolutely
they enjoy that, and then they come and read the G-Man comics too.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, it's not a lose. Like, there's no lose there, and right, there's no lose. Right. Like, everybody's happy, and again, it's about reaching your audience, however you do it. That's it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the thing is with the G-Man comics, we started with the mock covers. So we had people looking at what we were doing for years. I mean, I think we did 70 mock covers. You know what I mean? And we were just having fun before we got around to doing our first comic. And so when we published our first comic, there were already people who had seen some of the stuff we'd done and thought the stuff we were doing was fun and cool.
You probably drove people nuts. They're looking at these covers and going, "What the heck is this? I want to know."
Yeah, exactly.
Right? right?
And so then we started actually doing the comics, and so we had to change the characters up a little because
Sure.
they couldn't look they could look more derivative when we're just doing this fan stuff.
Oh,
But you
absolutely.
don't want to mislead people to think that the characters are something they're not. So you have to be, you had to kind of re-engineer when you're doing it. You're actually publishing a
Sure,
comic.
but there actually, I just for this alone, I ought to give you a big giant thank you. That's actually because just I never thought about doing it that way, but it's one of the most ingenious little ways you could actually do some marketing without actually doing heavy advertising. Like I said, even though they were derivative, I am betting like you had people curious. You had people going, okay, this is fun. What's this for? Like, there's always that question.
Well, we
Right?
didn't have a plan that way. I mean, I'm sorry, it was
No,
never with that. It just turned out that way. I mean,
no. But
it wouldn't be called G-Man Comics if that wasn't what we were doing.
oh,
The
sure.
mock covers for. And so then we didn't even start with a comic. We started with the who's who. It was me and a few of the guys putting together our characters in a handbook. And the first one we called the Who's Who Handbook of the G-Man Universe, combining the DC Who's Who and the Handbook of the Marvel Universe. And I think it was only like 8 pages of just our characters
But
that Gilbert drew that had no comic to go with it.
no, yeah. But I again, just speaking as a consumer, I'd see something that
Yes.
would get my attention, and I'd be like, "Well, what's it for?" And I would look for it, and if I couldn't find it, I'd be like, well, they got to be doing for something. And I think the fact that you didn't plan it that way is actually odd. But again, it worked out for you guys in a very
Yeah,
odd
no,
way,
it did work
right?
out for us. And I'm very happy about it. And it was all very organic. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It was just us having fun, and it's still fun. Well, of course, we wouldn't do it if it wasn't fun.
You would hope. You would hope, right? You would hope. But I mean,
Well, this is it. In my day job, I was working. I was at work, and I got a text from one of the artists, and he said, we need the mother for one of these characters. I don't have a reference. And I said, well, we hadn't done anything with that character. You're drawing it for the first time ever. So I went over to one of the people I work with, and I took her picture and sent it to the artist, and then we drew her in the comic. And we're getting ready for the February Kickstarter, but one of the other guys I worked with came up to me and says, I'd like to be in the comic too.
that's fantastic.
And so I took his picture and sent it off, and we'll be doing that in August. We're the comics for February are done. Oh, when we do a Kickstarter, they're done. Mm-hmm. We're not taking your money to produce a comic. We're taking your money to print it and ship it to you.
Mm-hmm. So the only thing that might get in the way is shipping. But besides that, it's going to be there when you say it's going to be there.
Well, yeah. So what happens? I mean, literally, we run for the month of February, mm-hmm. and so it'll be the full month of February. It's 28 days instead of 30 because I don't want to hang out into March. It's just 1 month we're available, and so March 15th, Kickstarter gives us the funds. We turn those over to the printer. The printer prints them and ships them. And then you get the comic. And usually the printing and the sorting of all the books and packaging and all that is a 6-week process. So literally from the day, you pledge, the Kickstarter ends and you have your comic within 2 months.
Yep. I wanted to show you something.
Yeah.
Did you see that?
Yeah. Okay. Lone Wolf Comics.
Yeah. Yeah, basically, yeah. So some of the stuff from the from the comic book reviews and stuff, they are getting out there in other forms or fashions as of right now.
Absolutely, that's cool.
Yeah, it's very, very cool. No, I mean, you never know where something will lead you. I want to wish you the best of luck on your Kickstarter. You. So it starts February 1st. Is it 28 days?
It's going to be 28 days because we're running just the month of February, so it'll shut off at the end of February. It will not bleed into March. Okay. I mean. All sorts of people start them at all sorts of times, and they run for all sorts of odd times. But we've tended to run a calendar month, You know what I mean? So if it's February, it's short. If it's August, it'll, run to the end of August. Just because that's what I'm used to. Comics they're monthly. We're not really doing monthly, but we got enough comics for you to get your monthly comic. Every 6 months, and you get 6 of them from us.
Yeah, so you definitely get your piece. So you want people to go here to see what's going on with your latest stuff.
And on that front page, there will be a link to the Kickstarter, but it also have a link to all the comics. You can see the covers. You can see what they're about. You can see the solicitations for the back issues. We have a who's for all the characters. You can familiarize yourself with the characters and see what looks interesting to you. We we just got the video back for the Kickstarter, and after I get off this with you, I'm going to put that up on the website. We put it up on the Kickstarter, and I put it up on Facebook and Twitter, and I have to put that up on the website too. I put it on a post, but I want to move that to the front page.
Yeah, you want to put stuff like that in the front page. Just evergreen.
I'll move the video to the front page after this.
I make video advertisements for clients, so you want those stuff to be as evergreen as possible. All right, so sir, do you want to pitch one of the books to wrap this bat interview up, or do you want to just pitch the whole project for February?
Well, so the flagship book I'll tell you a little bit about each of them, but the flagship book is Simon and Kirby the Agent. And in our universe, there was a Superhero Registration Act, and everyone registered, and there wasn't any issue about it. Everyone's just deputized. If you're not deputized, you're a vigilante and you're the villain. And so in each issue, he picks the right agents for the right mission, so that he has a different team, sort of like the Avengers, but it's a rotating team. And backers can back to be in the book as part of the team. So that makes it kind of unique. And so those pages are the only pages that are still waiting for those panels to be finished. And when the backers back, the artist will add their characters to layered in there. And then I'm producing the second issue of Lynx, and Lynx is a street level character, and they're going after street level crime. We have a liquor store robbery. We have a protection racket. Just what happens in a neighborhood. I've got Sergeant Flag, who's Rob McFarlane, and it's a 90s style comic with a lot of action, and the way I remember 90s movies and 90s comics. Simon and Kirby is the agent, which is a patriotic character, and Rob McFarlane is also a patriotic character, but from a different time and a different type of presentation. And it's a lot of fun. Eric has Tyrannus, which is the Celtic god of thunder.
Okay.
And so, it's all that Celtic mythology in there. So it is a different presentation than Thor, but still, gods walking the earth, and a lot of fun. And Jim has Invictus Outrage, and Outrage is basically the Max Fletcher Superman.
Okay.
But it's a black woman with a build like Serena Williams.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Okay, so it's a different presentation on that, but still the Superman type character. And so those are our main books I'm putting together. I'm also doing the 3-in-1 book with 3 stories from me. That's an anthology book. But, those are the main comics, the main 5 that we published last time, that we're going to publish this time, that we're already working towards, again, also for August of the next Kickstarter.
All righty. And I would be remiss. Hold on a second here. So I'm going to be remiss if I don't mention this place. First, I'm going to mention this. firstcomicsnews.com. If you want to see the latest updates on news, some reviews and stuff like that, definitely check that place out. But for what we're talking about here, go to gmancomics.com. Definitely take a look. The Kickstarter, is the launch page up now?
Right now we have the pre-launch page where you can sign up to be notified on the day of launch. And the website, of course, is up, and we'll have the ad there so you can see the commercial. It actually is 4 minutes long. We've done everything we can to make it as short as possible, and 4 minutes is as short as we can go. When you have that many comics, it just takes that long.
No. As a general rule of thumb, I've learned this the hard way, as my mouse now is no longer working quite like it should be. Trying to hide this again, but what I've learned, we can just keep it up, whatever. What I've learned. Oh no. There we go. I'm back.
Okay.
Sorry about that. That. Yeah, technology is a wonderful thing. I'm getting a new computer in like a week and a half or 2 weeks and a half. So
yeah, the machines do not love us, and they're taking over the world, and we will soon be their slaves.
It is a possibility. That's another conversation for another day. I will say this. First and foremost, thank you for letting me be part of your website.
Oh, thank you for contributing. That is one of the things that I was at. I started on the web at doing a list service for Yahoo, and then when I was actually doing interviews and reviews and things like that, it was at Silver Bullet Comics, and I was at Newsarama, and I was at Comic Book Resources. And one of the things about doing First Comics News, and now it's been forever, is that a lot of people get to contribute and share their love of comics.
Yeah.
And you and Tim and everyone else. And there are no real deadlines for that stuff. We post the news regularly, but whenever you feel like doing the column, you do the column. If you don't want to do a column this week, there's no deadline. There's no, you know what I mean? You get to contribute what you want when you're comfortable doing it. And it gives you a platform. And every time we, post your column, there's a link to your podcast, and hopefully that helps generate traffic. Yes, and you get to shine a light on the things that are important to you and the things you like.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I do too, is I just shine a light on the things that I like.
Well, I'm glad you appreciate the fact that although it's not completely an indie bent what I do, like it's a vast majority of what I do, but you seem to dig what I'm doing. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Like, yeah. So, and to everybody go, you can definitely check out my columns on a regular basis. But the most important thing for this podcast, at least, is go to gmancomics.com. You want to hear the launch is right now, and you can definitely pre-launch page, I should say, is right now, and it will launch February 1st. Absolutely. And if you're listening to this episode, that would means that the campaign is long underway, in which case go ahead and join in and definitely check it out. And beyond all that, folks, before I wrap up, I do advertising services. If you guys I make videos, words, pictures, stuff like that. If you want to promote a project or yourself, you can definitely check that out right here and right now. You can do so as with the link as discussed here. And that will do it. Tomorrow, I get an author that actually goes by the pseudonym Cosplay. It's going to be kind of fun talking about gamer books. Yeah. I mean, the cool thing about this show is I get people that are really related to the mainstream. I get people that are just doing their cool little things in the universe and everything in between. So that's what I did.
Absolutely.
So that'll be tomorrow afternoon, folks, if you guys are interested. But for everybody watching, everybody listening, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Stay inspired. Keep shining in the dark. And I'll see you next time.